Okay, got the black pieces. We'll wait to see if our opponent's here first of all. I take a long time on the first move too, so. There he is. E4. All right. What do we like here? Well, I'll start with the Sicilian, but I'm not sure which one I'm going to play yet. However, seeing C3 kind of simplifies things for me because, as I've mentioned a few times, when I see C3, the plan is for white to play D4. I don't really want to allow that, so I have to attack the E4 pawn. That means this move or this move. There are other playable moves here, but to be honest, those are the only two that really cross my mind. So, gonna go knight f6, attack this pawn. Certainly expect e5, at which point we'll play knight d5 and go into the center. Other moves in e5, I'm not quite sure. d4 just drops the pawn. Bishop d3, queen e2. Playable, but definitely not bothersome. And d3, sure, playable, but remember, white played c3 to play d4. So if I see d3 instead of d4, I'm very happy. Very happy in general. Okay, I'm going to go knight c6 because, hey, it stops e5. Okay, d6. I mean, not that e5 is a big threat here, but if I play d5, then my opponent might want to play e5. That makes sense. So I got to be a little careful there. So I'm looking at e5 or d6, the two main moves. g6 is also playable, but not in a particular rush. The reason d6 I'm like, at least still thinking about is because then I start to wonder about moves like d4. But I don't think it quite works because this is already, I've got an extra move, right? Because white's played d3, and then if they played d4 later, there's an extra move in there somewhere. So I think we should be okay here. I'm thinking about d6. I'm thinking about g6 and e5. e6 is still very okay, but I think I want to go for a fianchetto if I can. So I'm going to go for d6 here. Bishop g5 makes a lot of sense. e6 gets out of the, well, it's funny I say gets out of the pin, but I more so mean gets out of the threat of doubling my pawns there. So e6, bishop e7, and then castle. Nice, easy way to develop. Bishop g4 is perhaps another way to play, but it does allow, for better for worse, it does allow the pawns to get doubled. Do we care about these pawns being doubled? That's what I'm kind of thinking to myself right now. And I think the answer is no, because I can just play f5 to undouble them straight away. So, I don't know. I don't know. I think we're just going to go for g6. I will call the bluff, so to speak. Although the pawns get doubled, it looks extremely temporary because f5 is on the agenda and we basically want to get castled and play f5. So I'm not seeing the danger just yet. If he doesn't take on f6, okay, probably play bishop g7. I also like bishop g4, pinning the knight. Because again, for white, it's all about getting d4 and maybe e5 later, but this move plays directly against that. Makes a lot of sense, of course, that he wants to take that. It's the, number one reason that he played the way that he played, right? He wants to take, and he wants to play d4. So, after d4, I think we have a couple options. One of them is f5, but I'm not sure we want to get into the f5 business just yet. It's quite aggressive. One thing I want to avoid is taking, because then the knight just has the c3 square. I'd much rather see his knight utilize d2 instead. So bishop g7 is like the easy move. If we just need a move to play. Yeah, bishop g7, f5. I guess those are probably the two main moves I'm considering. But now I'm starting to look at queen e7, bishop d3, and moves like f5. Reason I'm stopping is because once white's castled, rook e1 is happening super quickly. So it's not as good as it might look. So yeah, I think probably bishop g7 and just getting castled is sort of the simpler approach. Let's go here to start off. Castling next. This is a weird c3 d3 game, I have to admit. Even though white's sort of stutter stepped d3 d4 and given up the bishop, there are a lot of good things that white has gotten from this as well. Lots of light squares. And if these bishops were ever to trade, then not so sure my remaining bishop is too happy. Yeah, bishop c4. Okay, well, it's definitely going to be castling here. I don't think I'm going to spend too much time because I know that it's a move we need to do. And I would say for him, it's pretty much the same thing. Yep. Well, now f5. That's pretty much all I'm looking at. Only question is whether I want to take. Previously, I had talked about how maybe I don't really want to take because I don't want to allow the knight to come to c3, but I also want to make sure once things open up for my bishop that it actually has something to do. And this pawn structure is not that enticing. Not that motivating to play against. But yeah, takes, knight takes, I'm not sure if I'm enjoying that. Knight takes, queen takes, f5, queen d3. I don't like this weak pawn I'm getting as a result. Like, I think that position's okay, but I'm going to keep it more simple. I think I'm going to go f5 right away. Takes and bishop takes. Yeah, I think f5 takes, bishop takes is nice. If pawn takes on c5, always possible. Of course, I'm going to take right back. If d5, I think, for the most part, knight e5 is always my reaction. But I think d5 is a very bad move. And then, I don't know, there's not really e5 or anything to worry about. Okay, so d5 has happened. I have some options here. Knight e5 is like my default move, but I have a lot of options. First one is knight a5 because it hits the bishop, and I'm still threatening this pawn. So knight a5 would force bishop d3 from what I see. Pawn takes, bishop takes. You know, and I have some moves to gain some time, but ultimately my knight ends up on a bit of a strange square, not really where I want it. The other thing I can do is take here. Now after that, I can take on f3, but, you know, white takes back on c6. I'm not really sure if I'm doing anything there. So I like this more than that, I think. And one of the reasons is, let's say a line like takes, takes, takes. If white plays pawn takes on e7, then we just take it back. And we're kind of threatening pawn takes g2. That looks pretty good. And if queen takes f3, then I take here. Queen takes c6, rook b8, hitting this pawn. Pawn has to be dealt with. I don't know, b3? How else do you deal with it? Right? But then this diagonal becomes really, really strong. And I have bishop b7 to hit the queen. So the more I look at it, the more I kind of like pawn takes e4. But let me just say, knight e4 is an extremely good move. Like, very, very good, very reliable. Maybe not amazing, but good. Definitely. So I'm kind of torn because I have such a good move available, like just decent, nothing wrong with it, knight e5. But then I have things I'm calculating like this, and it's like, should I get complicated or just stick with the simple move I know I have available? Knight a5 I'm just less of a fan of, didn't really spend too much time calculating because it puts the knight on the side of the board, and unless there's some immediate gratification, I don't like the placement of the knight. So kind of rejected that line. I think the best move is f takes e4. I really believe that. But the more I look at it, the more I'm like, 95 is so simple, and I believe so good. What's going to be my final decision? I like them both a lot. Okay. Takes, takes, takes. I think we're going to go for it. One of the reasons I really liked knight e5 is because the knight takes, my bishop takes, and, you know, let's say pawn takes f5. Queen h4 already pretty much wins the game. Mate's threatened and the bishop's hanging. So there were a lot of very, very compelling tactics in that variation, but this one is extremely forcing. So we take here. Now, if white does not take, I think there's already some issues. Rook b8 immediately makes a big threat. If the pawn moves, then you've got this to deal with, so your knight can't develop. Bishop to b3 can absolutely be played, but I'm about to develop with a lot of tempo. Bishop here, queen to g5, right? Bishop here, where does this queen go? It has to go over here, right? So the queen's over here. I feel like the pieces can barely move in that case. So bishop b7, I think, is an immediate move. Queen g5 is about to arrive with immense pressure. So even though the other line was very tempting, I thought that this was a way for the pieces to really, really develop with tempo. Okay, so bit of an important moment. The knight still can't really develop. Queen g5, the only move I can see that's reasonable is f3. We have queen e3 check, and, you know, bishop takes c3, but obviously that's not really good enough. But what does seem to be good enough is d5. So I'm going to start with queen g5, just because I'd like to see this happen, right? I'd like to see f3. I think f3 is a bad move. Now after f3, like I said, I have queen e3 to maybe win a pawn, but I don't want to win a pawn. I want to play d5, so if the bishop drops back, well then my queen check is significantly more devastating. And g3 can also be played, but g3 just has this weird feeling, right? Because now I'm sitting there thinking, okay, wait a minute. All I need to do is get to that diagonal, and good things are going to happen. They're just going to happen. So how the heck do I get there? The other thing I really like about d5 is after the move d4, it can't be taken because bishop takes completely wins the rook. So d5, d4 is also a very tempting idea. So I think d5, d4 needs to happen here. My other alternative is a move like queen g4 or queen h5. White would then need to play like bishop d3. We have this. Basically, how do I get on this diagonal, right? Queen here. Knight d2, we have this. Yeah. Okay, so the ideas are there. Queen g4 doesn't work, but queen h5 does. Queen g4, just bishop f7, but queen h5 does what I want to do with queen g4, but is actually playable. So those were the candidates. Only one of them is actually playable right now. So queen h5, and the reason I suggest that is because it stops bishop e2. Queen h5, bishop e2, right? Not possible. So how does my opponent actually stop this? Knight there, not really playable either. I don't think that's better than d5 though. Or actually, wait a minute. d5, bishop a6. That's probably the main move I should be considering. Yeah, okay. Bishop a6 is a bit annoying, I'm not gonna lie. Let's go here. I like this idea. I like this plan in general. Like, this is game over. Bishop d3 loses, so it kind of forces knight d2 from what I can see. And then bishop c3, winning a pawn. We got d5 next. So even though I'm speaking these things out loud, they're probably the things that would be going on in your head. So that's often how I will not only maybe dodge a blunder, but also just arrive at maybe the best move. Like, I like queen g4 because it threatens queen e4, queen f3. Seems like the better move. But I don't know, you talk about the variation enough and you're like, oh, okay. There's actually something wrong with that one. But queen h5 does the exact same thing. And yeah, my opponent's just not realizing what I was going for, which happens. But knight's covering c3. He didn't want to move it. It was probably the only move. Queen f3, just lining up these two pieces on the diagonal. There's not going to be any stopping checkmate now. Don't want to pre-move it because there's a number of random moves that could get played, but yeah, the game is effectively over. I like how we handled that. I like how we calculated that. Avoided the blunders. I think made the right decision. I'd be curious to look after the game, but I think we made a good decision there. Yeah, the unfortunate experience is setting in where you kind of realize, like, you see the threats in front of you and it's sinking in that you have no way to deal with them. I have 2 checkmate threats. Even if I only had one of them, it would still be game over. Yeah, so that's a fair resignation. It is completely over. He would just delay it a couple moves with sacrifices, but it is force mate. But so what did we have here? Yeah, this was I thought it was a reasonable game by my opponent. Like, not a great one by me in the opening, but still, I was calling the bluff a little bit on bishop takes f6, you know? It's an alright move. But I still think that as long as we just get castled and play f5, that we should be fine. There we go. So f5. So I thought we were good here because now we have the bishop pair. We're opening things up. And here, after d5, I was happy. We spent the time, we calculated, and I think we came up with the best move. Pawn takes pawn. Knight e5 is just such a good option as well. It looks so tempting. But here, if white plays knight d2, I take, and after knight takes, then there's some issues, right? And we already talked about this. I just play queen to h4, right? Same thing here. If pawn takes, oh, queen h4. So I was about to say that this looked really, really promising for black. And almost every move looks crushing here. But I saw f4 and I was like, yeah, that's probably the move that makes it annoying. I'm not going to lie. Now there's no queen h4 fun, and my opponent, it's still going to be worse, but they'll make it out alive. And this is all forced. Takes, gotta take. Okay, we take. Queen takes. I mean, if you don't play queen takes and you play pawn takes here, we take back, and what? You're going to take here? I mean, that's insane, right? It's completely over now. There's no way you survive this. So if you don't take here, you have to take here. Takes, queen takes, but this is all by force. Rook b8, hitting the pawn. This is expected because you don't want to lose it, but then bishop b7. So the line that I got on the board in my game was what we calculated, and even though we're not even up a pawn here, it's almost -4 for black, which is a pretty serious evaluation. So I thought, hey, maybe g3 is not a bad move, but I thought f3 might get played, and then what was my plan? d5. I did not want to allow my opponent to play this. I have queen e3 check. Bishop a6, and here I could play bishop a8 to keep the bishop, but honestly I was thinking about d4. Like, it just looked really, really strong because it can never be taken. And I'm threatening to take, play c2, like I think it's just a massacre at this point. But yeah, open position, bishops, both of them are super strong, and in the end, just didn't see my intention here. I think queen h5 I'm pretty happy with. Threatens to get in there with queen f3. Yeah, probably had to play like f3 now or something, but it's just bad. Very, very bad. Very, very bad. Ribs. What is white's best move after queen g5? What's the computer move after queen g5? Were you not listening to my evaluation there? I think we just talked about it, right? Queen g5, I said probably f3 made more sense, and I was going to play this. I mean, he only has 2 options here, right? So I don't know what you're asking me. He played this move in the game. I went for this. Pretty simple. It looks like black's much better. He didn't play this move, which I just went over, was the other option. I mean, there's only 2 moves. What do you want? There's only 2 moves, buddy. Hello to Red Drum. Good to see you, Daryl. Hello to Aiden. Aiden, your Australian accent really made an appearance on the EU trip. It was almost like you were there with us, buddy. You were there in spirit. Hey, KVX. Thank you. Feels good to be back.